Story 1. This happened 2 days ago and I'm still very shaken up about it. I was with my brother and father. We were just at the immigration department in HK to sort something out for us. Further context, I'm 20F and I'm not a HK local. It was getting late and my dad suggested we start taking the bus back now to eat closer to the apartment area, or most good places would be close by then. Midway there was a stop that my brother suggested we get off and find food. We all agreed. I started to desperately need to use the toilet, and so my brother pointed at the closest McDonald's we could see. Big mistake. We go in, my brother and dad are waiting downstairs. I was under the assumption that, well, if there's no toilet downstairs then there should be one up. If not, I'll leave and find another place. I walk up the stairs and look around, somewhat pacing as I desperately need to pee. The McDonald's worker seems to have spotted me and was looking at me, almost expecting me to bother him. I asked him if there's a toilet. He said, "Toilet? Through the door, turn left and take a lift up." It's a ominous brown door with no signs or anything at the front. He's the worker, so I assume he knows better than me. I open it and what the fuck? It's very dark and run down, a completely different vibe to the modern McDonald's. Extremely quiet. As soon as the door closed, it was almost soundproofed. All the bustling loud noises in the McDonald's had completely stopped. The room was just very dark with minimal white light. There were multiple doors that appeared locked in the building. I didn't explore much as I thought it was maybe a staff room. I turned the left corner as instructed and there was indeed a lift. I assume maybe this is just a very odd passage to a shopping mall, which isn't too uncommon in Hong Kong, and surely how bad can this be if there is a lift? I press the lift and step in. Suddenly I hear the door open and the worker that directed me goes into the lift with me as well. I notice he's holding a black bin bag that is filled with little to nothing. I assume, oh okay, maybe he needs to put this out and help me find the toilet? Kill two birds with one stone. I ask him what floor I press and he presses the second floor. Once the door closes it's a bit quiet and awkward. I glance at him for a second. He was wearing a COVID face mask, one eye looking forwards, and he had a lazy eye looking to the side. Suddenly he says, "Lang ho lung," which translates to "you're very pretty" in Cantonese. At this point it's very awkward and I just said a quiet thank you to not aggravate him. I'm wagering if I actually need to pee this badly now. The lift stops, finally. I was fully expecting a shopping mall when the lift doors open. That was not the case. The doors opened and it was just a dark, quiet, very run-down narrow hallway of doors. It was so dark with infinite corners. Not a single person was there but us. I couldn't tell what the building was, an odd cross of abandoned apartment building doors and office doors. At this point we're both still standing in the lift and my entire body is in a fight or flight response as this whole situation was making me fear the worst. The worker gestures to me to get off at this lift and almost wants to continue walking me to the toilet. I quickly make an excuse of, "I've bothered you so much already from your work. You can just point at the direction and I'll find it, promise." He points to the right and tells me to go through there and that's the toilet. I thank him and then go the complete opposite direction he told me. The whole place was like a fucking maze, narrow hallway with doors. I got curious and pushed at one of them and it was locked. At this point I'm really trying to stall enough time to appear. I went to the toilet before getting the lift back down. I get a call from my brother now, a very angry call asking why I've taken so long and where I am. I explain I don't know where I am. I'm trying to find my way back. I hang up and I'm getting increasingly more scared as the place is giant, as I mentioned, like an abandoned office/apartment hallways with no signs or anything while being extremely dark with minimal light. The walls were all tiered down. It's just so quiet and run down. There was no way a functioning toilet was up here. I'm really panicking now and trying to find my way back to the lift, scared shitless. My initial discomfort of desperately needing to pee turned to desperately wanting to leave. I calmed myself down a bit with breathing exercises and tried to recollect the steps I took, finally found the lift and quickly pressed back down. I pressed the close button so much. The lift takes me back down to the hallway, but by accident I walk forwards instead of turning right. What the fuck? There are more doors, 4 to 5 doors next to each other, but what was the most strange was the fact the doors were all facing this large glass panel wall between the McDonald's. I was able to look at the McDonald's and people eating, but they didn't notice I was there at all. I walked back and turned right this time, through the door. I was finally in the McDonald's again, but that glass wall on my end appeared to be a large mirror in the McDonald's. It was a double mirror. I looked around and there was no sight of the McDonald's worker either. I quickly walk back down the McDonald's. I see my dad and brother. My dad asked if I was okay as I looked really pale. I said I'll tell him when we're out. I asked him if he saw the worker again when they were waiting, describing him as a man with a mask on and a lazy eye. My dad shook his head and said he didn't see any workers when he checked upstairs for me earlier. My heart dropped as soon as I heard that. The worker was still up the lift. My dad also said, "Don't tell me you went through that lift." I opened that door and walked through a bit to find you. It was scary. Why were there so many doors in that glass? I thought there was something wrong, so I got out immediately. Bear in mind my dad is a built-as-fuck man himself. I will never go to the toilets alone again, and seeing a McDonald's will forever hold this memory for me. Edit. I can't stop thinking and obsessing over what the fuck that building was. I'm horrified to think what would have happened if I blindly followed his directions he gave me or allowed him to escort me to the toilet. I also just don't think in any context it was appropriate for a worker to be that involved. I found a toilet. He 100% wouldn't have escorted a man to the toilet either. Story 2. When I studied abroad in Rome, I had a ton of new experiences, most of them amazing. But there were a few that still sit a little weird with me. At the time, the euro was weaker than the dollar, so I felt like I had a little spending power. I treated myself to a massage at a spa I found through some well-reviewed tourist recommendations. It was a bit of a trek from where I was staying, somewhere between Tuscolano and Prenestino Labicano. Even though it was far, I usually felt pretty safe in Rome overall. Back then, I didn't have a lot of friends who were up for exploring with me. So I went solo. Before my spa appointment, I decided to explore the neighborhood a bit. I wandered into a dollar store, then kept walking around the area. That's when I started noticing something odd. There were no women walking around alone. Most women were with men. I noticed very few women walking alone, but a lot of men. It wasn't that their presence was scary, but the constant staring started to wear on me. I tried to walk with confidence, hoping that would be enough. One cultural difference I really struggled with in Italy was smiling. In the US, it's normal to smile at strangers. It's just polite. But in Italy, and please correct me if this is wrong, I learned that smiling can sometimes be taken as a sign of romantic or sexual interest. So I tried to frown as much as I could while walking around, which didn't really help. I love grocery shopping, especially in other countries. So when I spotted a grocery store nearby, I figured I'd pop in and check it out. At first, everything felt normal. I was just browsing, thinking about what I could maybe cook later. Then I noticed this tall guy in a yellow sweater. He seemed to be showing up in every aisle I was in. I brushed it off at first, maybe he was just shopping too? But then I ended up in a quiet corner of the store. It was just me and another woman. She left, and suddenly a yellow sweater guy was there. He greeted me holding a box of chocolates and said I was pretty. He wanted to give them to me. I was thrown off. I wasn't even sure if he paid for the chocolates. It started to click that this wasn't just awkward, it was sketchy. He kept trying to talk to me, asking me to take the chocolates and go on a date. I tried to politely decline. "Oh, that's nice, thank you, but I didn't want them." He said he didn't speak much English, which made the situation more complicated. I didn't have any cell service to use Google Translate, and he just kept pushing. I told him no over and over, but he kept asking, "Why? Why not? Why?" He didn't understand what I was saying, or maybe he just didn't care. I was getting nervous, so I pulled out a photo of my boyfriend on my phone and said, "This is my boyfriend. I already have one." He looked at the photo and asked, "Is he here?" I said, "Bye," and bolted. He followed me out, but he was a bit behind. I managed to duck behind a building and watched him leave in the opposite direction. I was terrified. Looking back, I wish I hadn't said anything to him at all, but I was younger and still figuring things out. To this day, I'm very cautious whenever I see the same guy in more than 3 aisles. I listened to the Reddit on Wiki podcast and recently heard a story on Let's Not Meet that reminded me of this. That's when I realized, yeah, I was probably in more danger than I thought. I'm really grateful I trusted my gut and stayed alert. I didn't tell the spa what happened, even though they were all women and made me feel safe. But after that, I noticed so many more men staring at me. And I hated every second of it. Story 3. My coworker invited me to a social event which turned out to be a cult-like ritual. After college, I moved back in with my parents in Los Angeles. It wasn't exactly what I had pictured for myself, but I couldn't find a job in my field, and I couldn't just sit around looking for work. I took a job as a records clerk at a psychiatry clinic. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid, and it gave me some structure at a time when I really needed it. I spent most of my day updating patient charts, organizing files, and looking busy any time the office manager walked by. Kira was one of the medical assistants. She was nice, but a little intense. Very into people. She asked a lot of questions about my weekends, my spiritual beliefs, etc. I feel like everyone knows someone like that. Every week, she'd invite me to hang out with her and her circle, which sounded less like a friend group and more like a meditation pod. I said no many times. At first, I thought she was just being polite. Then it started to feel like pressure. Eventually, I gave in. I figured it couldn't be that bad. Worst case, I'd drink some herbal tea and sit through a group discussion about Mercury in retrograde. She picked me up in a long white linen outfit and told me we were meeting at someone's house. The closer we got, the more Kira's mood changed. I can't point to exactly what was changing, but I was just getting more and more uneasy. We pulled up to this house on a quiet side street and went inside. There were candles lit along the floor and low music playing. People were already there wearing similar linen robes, standing around like they were waiting for something. At first, I thought it had to be a themed party. Like a witchy aesthetic thing. I even laughed a little. Kira smiled and introduced me around. Everyone was nice and polite. The more people I met, the creepier it got. Then a man walked in carrying a wooden crate. Inside was a goat. Alive. I still thought it had to be a joke. A weird joke, but a joke. Someone brought out a large ceramic bowl. Another person started chanting in a low voice. And then a woman lifted the goat out of the crate and said something about freeing its essence. Another person had a really sharp knife. I think I could see where that was going. Everyone was acting like this was normal. Like it was just part of the evening. I turned around and walked back the way we came. I didn't say a word. I don't even think Kira realized I had left. I got just far enough from the house that no one would find me and called an Uber. It cost me $120 to get home, but I didn't care. I would have paid double. The next morning, she texted me like nothing happened. Just a casual, "Hope you got home okay," smiley face. I kept seeing her at work. She never brought it up. To her, I guess everything was totally normal. I still have no idea what that was. I don't work at that clinic anymore, but I would be way too scared to contact her and ask. Story 4. Maybe I was overreacting, maybe I could have died. This has been in the forefront of my mind ever since this happened. I remember it so vividly, and it's definitely one of the scariest experiences of my life. It could very much be that I was overreacting, maybe the sub can decide. A little background. I've been a resident of New York pretty much all my life. This happened around my sophomore year of high school. I had this route that I would take from school every single day, train line. I never had really thought much of this, the everyday commute essentially becoming muscle memory, since I knew where to go and when to get off. Fatal issue, because of this, I became less and less aware of my surroundings as time went on. So my commute started like any other, and I had headphones on. However, I had one ear out so I could hear what stops were announced and in case of emergency. I got into the train car, give or take a second car from the end of the train. I had noticed this man yelling to himself, and I didn't think about it since that's pretty much the usual in the subway. Police came into the car from the station, asking everyone in the car if we felt safe and if the train was okay to leave, to mixed responses. A yes here, a no there. I just minded my own business. The man starts yelling at the police and I really at this point didn't care. The train pulls out of the station, I feel totally fine. The guy keeps yelling and I don't think anything of it. Until he says something along the lines of, "What they don't know is I've got a big-ass knife." Now a part of me thought rationally, Okay, well, he's most likely talking out of his ass or is under the influence. But my gut just told me to run. His hand was also fidgeting in his pocket, and I really wasn't about to take any chances. And I think that was the sentiment of some other people, as when the train had stopped at a station, the majority of us had either moved the next car over or got off completely. I was in the group that moved the next car over. A guy that I had talked to a few times from my school, who was in the same grade as me, had also been in the car with me and the screaming man, and had also made the choice to move, had sat down right next to where I was standing, and I remember looking at him, and him looking at me, and we just started laughing because we were trying to make the most light of the situation. The train starts moving, and I'll never forget what happened after that. I looked through the car door connecting the train car I was currently in, and the one the man was in, he looked me dead in the eyes and started walking towards me. Fight or flight immediately kicked in and I chose flight. I pushed past a group of people standing in that car, and when I had looked back to check if the man was still following me, he had already made it to my car and was mere feet away from me. At that moment my life quite literally flashed before my eyes and I just prayed. I don't know what his intentions were anyway, but once he got to me, he just shoved me onto an empty seat and kept walking. I didn't even mind the shove because I was so God-forsakenly thankful that at that moment, I wasn't stabbed. My stop came next, the train stopped, and looking back to make sure he didn't see me again, I ran like the wind out of the station. I called my mom immediately after and started freaking out. Now here's where things get dicey. Since it was the middle of the day and there were a good amount of people on the train, there's a good chance he wouldn't attack me in broad daylight with so many people around. But then again, there have been slashings and stabbings on packed trains before. More common than you think. I'm a very panicky person, so it's quite likely that this could all be one big exaggeration, but my intuition has yet to fail me, and the chills I got that day, the look in that man's eyes as he sped towards me are things I will never forget. Regardless, man on the train, let's not meet again. Story 5. Creep on the beach. I'm not against anyone shooting their shots, but there's a reason I always wear my wedding ring, even to the beach. I'm happily married. Today, I had just set up my little beach spot, hadn't even taken my cover-up off, when this guy started making eye contact and walked straight over. When you're alone, you quickly learn to read situations and decide whether to be friendly to defuse, cautious to distance, or direct to shut it down. There were families on both sides of me, so I opted for polite but firm. He goes to shake my hand. I give him the two-finger version, short and detached. He starts with the usual, "Are you local? Waiting on friends? Where at?" I say I'm not comfortable sharing. He then rambles about Wisconsin and hits me with, "What are you doing later?" I calmly say, "I'm married." He finally walks away. I'm glad he left, but what threw me was that he wasn't charming, funny, attractive, or even remotely self-aware. He was nowhere near my league, which made it feel like a setup. Like, what's the play here? Both nearby couples clearly noticed and were watching out, which I appreciated. Still, now I'm tanning but uncomfortable, thinking he might circle back and creep. My husband's working today or he'd be with me, but this is why I moved to Florida, to enjoy the beach. And I should be able to do that, wedding ring shining, without worrying about random men trying to insert themselves into my peace. Story 6. Man in mental hospital watched me sleep. This happened years ago, about a month after my 18th birthday. It's all kind of a blur story-wise, but I remember the twisted feeling in my stomach and the sound of my heartbeat in my ears like it happened yesterday. Growing up, I had a lot of trouble managing my emotions. I spent a lot of time in psychiatric centers and intensive outpatient programs. This was my first, and hopefully last, stay in the adult psychiatric wing. A long time ago on a Saturday night, I had a crisis that resulted in my mom driving me to the emergency room. We were in a little room in the psychiatric wing when the social worker came in to conduct the interview. I usually send my mom out of the room for them because I think hearing those sorts of discussions in my state of mind would upset her, so I asked to do the interviews alone. I wish I had thought about where I was and who I was with before I had done so. A nurse escorted her to another room, and the interview was conducted. By the time it was over, it was 1 or 2 a.m. There were no clocks in there, and I started to nod off fairly quickly. At some point I woke up with the sensation that I had been startled awake. Groggily, I glanced towards the door. It had a big square window, and peering through it was a man in a hospital gown, maybe early 50s, staring blankly at me. When I met his gaze, he just kept staring. I felt my heart pounding out of my chest while I was frozen with fear. We just stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. I don't remember falling asleep again, but at some point I did. Sometime later, I woke up again with an uneasy feeling. I opened one eye and peeked towards the door, and there he was. I saw this man staring at me again. I was tired, I was scared, and all I wanted was my mom. I just closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep. I didn't know what else to do. After a little bit I heard the squeak of sneakers approach, and a kind nurse's voice. "Is everything okay?" she asked the man. "Yeah, I'm fine, I'm just taking a walk." I guess that freaked him out because the next time I took a peek at the door he was gone. To this day I have no idea how long he was actually standing there for. All I know is that eventually, a little while later I was woken up by a nurse to switch rooms. Middle-aged Joe Goldberg, let's not meet again. Story 7. Creepy SUV driver. I, mid-30s F, typically take the trash out late at night after everyone in the house has gone to bed because good Lord can generate trash sometimes and I just want to do it once a day, but I digress, My apartment complex is, well, it deserves the title of complex since it's pretty big and composed of multiple, smaller apartment buildings in a winding maze of streets. The buildings are typically built surrounding islands of smaller parking lots, most of which are connected with either footpaths or driveways. This also means that you can typically see into multiple parking lot areas from certain points of the sidewalk and main roads. Even if it's confusing, or maybe because it's confusing and thus not very friendly for people just wandering in, it's a pretty safe neighborhood. There's been no violent crimes since I've moved in, and the worst thing that really happens are small fender benders from tipsy students or random wildlife wandering in. I saw a deer once walking down the street. It was neat. So, the closest dumpster is a block down the street, nestled into a driveway leading to one of these parking lots just off of a street that loops around on itself. Inside this loop is a cluster of buildings and 2 driveway-connected parking lots. The complex itself is typically quiet at that time of night, with little to no traffic coming into it. This is what made the black SUV stand out so much. I heard them drive in from the main highway just outside of the complex, but it didn't really register until they drove past me. Weird, but, it happens from time to time. It became even weirder when I got to the dumpster and realized that they were just pulling into a parking spot in the farther parking lot inside the loop, pointed to stare at me. They kept their headlights on and weren't making any obvious attempt to get out of the vehicle and into an apartment. Weirder and weirder. I literally threw the trash in the dumpster and speed-walked back to my house. It got outright creepy the next night when they came back again. I'm not sure where they came from, but it was almost like they were waiting for me. They drove by me slowly as I started walking to the dumpster, went around the loop, and then drove through the further parking lot to a spot in the closer one inside the loop where they could stare at me without being clearly seen themselves. Weirder still, and something that sent up all the red flags. I ran back to my house after tossing the trash again. The third night too. No one drove by me, so that was a plus. Maybe they moved on. Or it was just a strange coincidence the past couple of nights. I was hoping that, at least, until I got halfway down the block to the dumpster and saw a black SUV, no lights on at all, parked just past the dumpster with the person in the driver's seat staying as still as possible, the better to not be seen, I guess. Sirens started blaring in my head and I noped out of there so hard as soon as I saw them that I'm still noping at the thought, I really didn't want to stay around to find out what, if anything, they had planned. Obviously, I switched my routine up again for a while, and I haven't seen them in the handful of years since this happened. Maybe this all was a string of completely innocent, unconnected coincidences and weirdly timed encounters, but, well, I trust my instincts since they've never been wrong, and my instincts were telling me that there was nothing good happening. Story 8. My landlord knew what items I had in my bedroom. I never met my landlord in person. When I was 18, I was desperate to find a place to stay for university. There is a massive housing shortage where I live, so I went on Facebook to find a room. Eventually a man from Egypt dumped me, saying that he has a private room available. He told me that he moved back to Egypt due to being ill and decided to rent out his 3-bedroom house. He had no profile picture or any info on his profile other than his name. He gave me the address to get a house tour with the current tenants that are moving out. His son was the one that let me have a house tour, and that gave me the keys later via mail. This is a shared house with 3 students, with the kitchen and bathroom being shared. I tour around. Everything seems to be normal and clean in this house. So I asked the former tenants why they're leaving. They told me that the landlord is a weird guy. But I think nothing of it and decide to sign the contract via email. I did not see his son after that house tour. After signing the contract, the landlord got my phone number on WhatsApp and messaged me saying that he wants to build a friendship with me. I say that I'm too busy right now with school. He would call me sometimes 10 times a day and ask why I'm not picking up. He called me because he said he was lonely and needed company. Most of the time I wouldn't respond and move past it and pay the rent. About a month after I moved into the house, his messages became stranger. I notice you have a heater and an air fryer on your table. Could you please not use those? Why do you own 2 laptops? That's kinda strange. If this man claims he is living in Egypt, and I have never seen him in person, and my windows and my doors are fully shut and locked, how did he know that those items were sitting on my table? There were multiple messages like this commenting on the kind of objects in my room or how I organized my room. More importantly, he would attempt to charge €150 more on the rent for using my air fryer too much in my room. Again, how could he tell that I was using my air fryer and not my roommates, since I never brought my air fryer outside of my private room? As for the roommates, they were pretty chill and also students, not from Egypt however. When I told them about the messages I received, they said they hadn't gotten anything like that and heard nothing from the landlord. The roommates claimed that they've never been in my room or contacted the landlord. I don't believe them, so I asked to see their WhatsApp, and there have been no messages other than rent has been paid. I tested if the roommate's key could open my door and it could not. They were also gone for the majority of the day. So I started to test him. I would put specific objects onto my table in my private room and see if he said anything about it. Well, he noticed, and that's when I freaked the hell out in the middle of a class lecture. Then 2 days later, after ignoring all the comments about the objects I placed, I got several calls from unknown phone numbers. I answered only twice. The voice vaguely sounded like the landlord and said to come home. I came home and the trash that I threw out that day was all over the front door to my private room. Finally, after nearly a year of dealing with this, I finally found a safer place to stay and filed a restriction order against this Egyptian landlord. I still have absolutely no idea how he knew what objects I had in my private room, or how that trash ended up in front of my door. One friend of mine believes there were hidden cameras, while another believes a roommate was spying on me. But again, I don't really know. Story 9. He pointed a gun at me, then just walked away. About a year ago, I got high and wanted to get out of the city for a while. Just some solo nature time to clear my head. I took the subway heading toward this forest spot I like. Everything felt normal, until I noticed him. Everyone else on the train was half asleep, staring at their phones. But this one guy stood out immediately. Jittery, twitching, looking all over the place. When our eyes met for a second, it was like my brain lit up with alarms. He felt wrong. I looked away and tried to shake it off. Thought maybe I was just being paranoid because of the weed. I got off at my stop. He got off too. Took the escalator up. He was 1 step behind me, way too close. No personal space. Had this gym bag he set down right next to my foot. He kept shifting around in my peripheral vision. It made my skin crawl. I told myself to chill. You're high. You're just overthinking. At the next tram station, I tried to hang back and fake text. He walked past me. I felt relieved. I even laughed at myself a little. Just some random dude, right? Then I got on the tram heading toward the forest trail. And there he was again. Same seat, like he'd been waiting. My chest tightened. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Coincidence. Just paranoia. But I couldn't ignore that gut feeling screaming that something was off. I got off at my stop. So did he. I didn't go into the forest. I just stood near the tram station, trying to calm myself down, lit the cigarette, tried to breathe. That's when he came up to me with this fake-looking smile and asked, "Hey, do I know you? You looked familiar on the subway." I told him no. Then he said, "You smiled at me so nicely, I thought maybe we knew each other." I know I didn't smile at anyone. I was barely keeping myself together. He turned around and walked a few steps away. I thought that was the end of it. Then he bent down to his bag. And somehow I knew. Even before I saw anything. My body went cold. My brain was screaming, "He's going to shoot you." I saw it in my head before it happened. Him pulling the trigger, me bleeding out. He pulled out a handgun. Pointed it right at me. Just stood there. No words. Then made a fake shooting motion, like he pulled the trigger, and let out this weird, broken laugh. Put the gun back in the bag. Walked off. Never looked back. And I just stood there. Frozen. For at least 20 minutes. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. I didn't call the cops. I couldn't even think. I was too high, too panicked, and too shocked to do anything. It felt like time just stopped. I still don't fully understand what happened. I just can't simply process it. Whether it was some twisted joke or something worse that he decided not to do last minute. The weirdest part is, my gut knew way before I did. Story 10. Who chased me in the southern Utah desert? I was in my 20s at the time, young and full of ambition. At the time I was a raging alcoholic and drug addict. So my memory is kinda hazy, so I do apologize if most details aren't there and major other events are left out, now sober almost a year. Anyways, I moved to Salt Lake City, Utah from Arizona, and I had gotten a job as a service tech. One of these jobs I went on was adding devices for equipment on a string of gas stations starting from St. George to Salt Lake, slowly working my way up the state to Salt Lake City, hitting every store that was needing devices. I cannot remember exactly where I was for the life of me, somewhere between Richfield and another town. One of those small towns in between. I had finished a store late, about 10 to 11 p.m. or so, and wanted to get to the next town over so I can continue my work in the morning rather than drive 2 hours in the morning. As I'm driving down the highway, the Google Maps had told me to take this dirt road to get to the town I was working in next. Hesitant on why this was a route, I turned left into it. A long dirt road with nothing around me, pitch black darkness other than my high beams. About 5 to 7 minutes into my drive, my truck makes a sputter. It was an old 2008 work truck, POS. I cursed under my breath and put it in park. I lifted the hood and nothing seemed to be wrong. I have mild mechanical knowledge. Of course, I look down at my phone and see I have no cell service at all. I check my work phone and the same thing. My only option here was to pretty much either wait it out until daytime or find a spot where I can get a bar of service. So I took option 2. Also, I usually carry firearms, but this trip I had forgotten to bring it with me. Wielding a 10-inch pipe wrench and a Milwaukee flashlight, I walked into the desert determined to be rescued from the dark abyss. I'd like to add that this road was barely paved. I mean, you would not even take a truck on this unless you had to or it led to a specific point. I wouldn't even call it a road, more of a trail. Brush and trees lined up the trail like a natural wall. I'm not anxious or get scared very easily. I grew up in Arizona, so I was pretty used to the dark, quiet desert. Every step further from the truck made me feel more tense. I walked for about 10 minutes until I heard laughing. Kind of muffled laughing, something you'd hear out of a kid's show. Right behind me, I swung around quickly. Nothing. My boots are sinking into the mounds of sand as I quickly just keep pushing forward. My heart is beating out my chest like a ticking time bomb. I hear it again. But closer. Louder. Like if it was 4 to 5 feet from me. I'm fully sprinting into the desert brush and sand now. Eyes darting like lasers around for somewhere to hide. I do not believe in the paranormal or aliens or anything like that. I just figured it was some deranged desert hobo or something. Or some sort of drug addict. The adrenaline coursing through me. I hid behind a rock that was nearby. Crouched down, my right knee hurting by all the rocks on the ground. But I didn't care, I needed to hide. The rocks were one of those 3-footish mound rocks. The moon was shining bright so I could see some things. As I am scanning the desert, I see silhouettes of 2 people running. I can barely make them out, but my eyes had them adjusted to the dark abyss. I forgot to mention after a while of this running I turned my flashlight off to not give away my location. I hear them talking, but I'm far away enough to not be able to understand what they are saying. I literally sent out a message to my family and friends saying that I love them and that I'm sorry for anything I had done wrong in life. They didn't send BC, I did not have any service, just coping in a traumatic event, haha. I'm not a small guy. I'm 5 feet 10 inches 230 pounds, but I was unarmed and outnumbered. And God knows how many others were out there with them and what they were planning on doing when I was found and helpless. I waited, but they did not leave the general location of where they were at. Scrambling around like mosquitoes. I had thought of the only thing I could do. I grabbed 2 smallish rocks. I'm not religious, but I prayed to God that night and threw them far in a direction away from the truck and the road. I heard them scurry away towards the noise, shouting at each other as they trucked through the desert. I slowly crouched and walked through the brush back to the truck. I forgot to mention this earlier, but I heard another set of stomping after the 2 had run. There were 3 people in the desert with me. As I got closer, I could see the truck. I felt like I was in heaven. Every step was closer to salvation. My boots filled with sand with every stomp into the soft, cold sand. Branches and brushes stabbed me into my cargo work pants. I hear them tailing me. For the love of God, I could not turn around. I don't even care to see who or what it was chasing me. I see the truck. The truck driver's side door is completely open. I had left it closed. I checked the back seat and flung the door open more. I flew into the driver's seat in the truck and did the most stupid thing ever, but the only thing I can think of. Started it. It took a couple tries to start it, but it cranked and let out a roar. I threw the gear shifter in drive and drove. As I was driving, hauling ass down this dirt road, I see hooded people hiding along the sides of the road, ducking as I drove by, scattering into the darkness like roaches in a kitchen. I rolled down the window and chucked my pipe wrench as hard as I could right at one of them and sped off. I watched it flip right into where they were. I yelled as I sped off into the pitch-dark desert night. Trails of dust followed the truck as it drove. Silence, nothing but me and my heavy breathing trying to make sense of the whole situation. I drove until I saw the town lights. I was sweating, white knuckles on the steering wheel gritting my teeth, going at least 75 miles per hour. I got into the small town at around 12 a.m. I threw myself into a local 7-Eleven. Looking terrified, the cashier asked me what's wrong, and I just asked her to call the sheriff's office. The sheriff was some old burly-looking man. I'm covered in tattoos head to toe, so he treated me as a criminal almost by myself. Turns out some hose had bursted, do not remember exactly what it was. I got into town and called my boss, who was upset at the late-night call he was receiving. He was shocked at what I said and said to call the sheriff's office and mechanic. Mechanic guy was super nice and didn't charge me for the repair. The cops were not much help. They basically looked at me like I had been up too long and I was hallucinating. I was not, and had asked me if I had taken drugs or had drank, and barely wrote anything on the report. The mechanic was telling me that he had never heard of something like that in the area. I stayed in a motel that night. I believe it was a Motel 6, but I cannot remember. I swear I didn't get a lick of sleep that night after I showered the dirt off of me. I ended up returning home early and quit this job later down the line for other reasons. I have since moved out of Utah to Florida. A photo I had taken on the service call had come and reminded me of this story. I had to write about it. I had to tell someone. Was this a robbery? Were they trying to hurt me? Did they see the work truck and say, "Oh, expensive tools and copper"? I have no idea. I'm just curious who you think these people were and why they were hunting me like an animal. Has anyone had a similar experience? How close do you think I was to being murdered in the desert? Edits. The truck was looted. I remember all the wire, pipe, and some power tools were taken. We humans are not afraid of being alone in the dark, but finding someone else in the dark with us. Story 11. I was stalked by a Turkish trainer during vacation. Let's never meet again, Ibrahim. I want to tell you about a story that scared me as a teenager and I still don't know how I feel about it. I am a 16-year-old girl from Russia, quite petite and with a fair appearance. This is important for further context. I went to Turkey on vacation with my family. I play sports, so the first thing I did at the hotel was go play beach volleyball. There we met for the first time, with 19-year-old trainer Ibrahim. After the volleyball tournament took place, he came up to me and asked me in Russian what my name was and how old I was. Of course I told him that I was 16. He told me in the same way in Russian, "Wow, you're little." I didn't pay much attention to this. I decided that it was common politeness. BC, I don't have much experience with boys. The next day I came to volleyball again, and then, after the game, he asked for my number. I, a naive fool, decided that he just wanted to chat, nothing more. Because I don't like boys like him, I prefer European boys. He offered to see him after he finished work, and I, since I hardly communicate with non-Russian speakers, decided that this was a great opportunity to practice my English. At about 10 p.m. we met on the beach. At first there was nothing like that. We talked about simple topics. He was surprised that I was Russian and spoke English. I really got scared when I realized how helpless I was against the background of the big athletic guy Turk who could definitely knock me down and break me. After he took my hand without my permission and said, "You have such a warm and small hand, I like it." On the way back he asked how many boyfriends I had. When I said that I wasn't dating anyone, he asked, "And you never kiss a boy?" In parting, he tried to hug me and kiss me on the cheek. I didn't understand this and just dodged. After that I started avoiding him. He continued to write to me. I tried not to answer unnecessarily. Every time I came to play volleyball he took off his t-shirt. At first I didn't care, but after a couple of days I stopped going to volleyball altogether and saw that he was playing in a t-shirt without me. Then he again began to insist on meeting, talking about how sweet I was to him and how he would like to kiss me, stalked me on the hotel grounds, and even when I was eating on the terrace with my family he always approached us like a waiter. I had a panic attack from the thought that we were in the same closed territory. He often came up to me when I was somewhere alone, asking, "Why are you so tense and sad?" Said things that frightened me, like, "Ick, you look so cute to me, I really want to kiss you." I was afraid of him, but tried not to show it. The most unpleasant thing is that at the beginning of this story all my friends said, "This is just an ordinary fling on vacation, let yourself have fun." BC, he probably seemed attractive to them, but then even they began to be afraid for me. In the end, I just blocked him and stopped intersecting him completely. As a little girl, this still scares me and I don't know if it's my fault that he saw me as a piece of meat. Let's never meet again, Ibrahim. Story 12. Am I overreacting or is my mailman creepy? This will be long, so sorry in advance. I, 23F, have lived alone in a decently nice apartment in a nice neighborhood for 2 years now. For the most part, the mail gets delivered to the mailboxes at the front entrance of the building. Occasionally, packages are delivered straight to apartment doors, and it's pretty convenient. Well, about a year ago I was home from work during the day BC. I took the afternoon off to go to a doc appointment. The doorbell rang and I had a Ring camera. I saw it was the mailman, so I answered. I have this whole exchange on video. He was maybe in his 30s, white, short like 5'5"-ish, very large glasses, really disheveled thin hair. I opened the door, smiled and said, "Thanks so much," and went to take the package. He stopped and stared at me like something was wrong, so I was like, "Oh sorry, did you need to take a picture of the delivery or something?" And to my surprise he said, "I know you. I've seen you before, and you can see on the camera my face changes, my body demeanor gets uncomfortable, and I move behind the door." I said, "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met." I went to shut the door, but he raised his voice and took a step forward and said, "I've seen your name on your mail, I found you on Instagram." My face went white and I froze. I said, "Me?" I was kind of like a deer in headlights. He said, "Yeah, you are a person of interest on Instagram for me. Your account was private but you're pretty." Thanks. And slammed the door, locking it quickly. I was happy to know I caught the whole thing on video. I showed it to my then boyfriend, who agreed it was weird. A few days later, on Saturday, he's back at my door. He rang the bell about 10 times, waiting a few minutes just staring. I answered him through the doorbell and said, "Hi, you can just leave any mail, thanks." What he said next made me shake. He said, "I actually don't have any mail for you today. I just wanted to say hi. Can I come in for a glass of water?" I decided to just not answer. To be honest, I didn't know what to say. But then about 2 weeks go by. My then boyfriend stayed the night and slept in. I left early for work. I get a call around 10:30 from my BF. I won't believe what just happened, and to check the camera. I do. The mailman came. He rang the bell a few times and my BF answered the door. The mailman took a step back and my BF stood for a moment and they stared at each other. He realized the mailman didn't have anything in his hands. He said, "Can I help you?" And the mailman said, "Where's the small girl who lives here?" "I'm pretty petite, I'm slightly under 5 feet 100 pounds. My BF was stunned and said, "I live here too. From now on leave our packages downstairs," and slammed the door. I was really happy he said that. BC truthfully he didn't live with me full-time, maybe 2 nights a week. It seemed to work. I didn't see the mailman again at all actually. My then BF and I broke up a few months ago. I completely forgot about the mailman until today. I was entering my building where he was exiting at the same time I was entering. He stared at me and I went to walk by. He turned to walk after me and said, "Hey, I haven't seen that guy in a while who used to live with you. Did he move out?" I panicked and walked faster grabbing my keys, but I lied and said, "Oh, he's around." And as I entered quickly I said, "Hey honey, I'm home," and slammed it fast. Why I lied, but something told me to make it clear I wasn't alone. Am I being dramatic or mean? Or is he creepy? Update, I took everyone's advice. Thank you all so much. I decided to reach out to the super of my apartment and explain the situation and show him the videos. He said he will implement a new policy that male personnel are not permitted to walk around the complex. Simply go to the designated mailroom and leave. I also got large men's work boots and put them outside my door. Second update, wow, I wasn't expecting so many people to care about my story, LMAO. Thank you everyone. I took the advice and everyone telling me this isn't acceptable and decided it was time to call the postmaster. I sent them the video recordings I had and they assured me they will be looking into the matter as well as assigning a new mailman to my route. I also made sure to go down to my local police precinct and file an incident report and they have the videos as well. Thank you everyone. Also, I'm flattered that so many people are concerned, but I'm getting a lot of requests to post the videos. Considering I am in them and it shows my apartment and this is still ongoing, I prefer not to post them publicly yet. If anyone thinks they have experienced the same thing with him, please DM me, I'll send the videos privately, just not on the public forum. Story 13. I was seeing a fake psychologist for years. For some context, I had a really shitty childhood. It was terrible, where I don't remember anything from birth all the way to 13 years of age. Everything I know about what happened through those years was from a mixture of sparse memories, things my family has told me about myself, and police reports. One of those things I do remember, however, is this lady I called Auntie. No first name, no last name, nothing else contributing to her identity. She was just Auntie. I started seeing her when I was 7 years old, sitting in her living room as she typed everything I said down on her laptop. I had no problem with her. I saw her once every month and she seemed gentle enough that I really thought that she was someone I could trust. So I did. 7 years later, 14 years old, I admitted to her that I tried to kill myself numerous times. It was a mixture of multiple different factors: my mother's increasing toxicity, the lack of social interaction at the time, and more importantly, I never moved on from the horrors in my childhood. Now, I was 14 years old at the time, and I was able to wonder why these meetings with Auntie never actually seemed to help me, especially to do with the fact that I begged her to tell me why I constantly wanted to die. I remember on the way to Auntie's house, I asked my mother if I would ever get the chance to see a different person, maybe get a different sort of help that Auntie clearly couldn't give. I was just hissed at to be quiet. Around that time, the relationship between me and my mother began to crack. My mother became a source of grief to me, and I cried about it during multiple sessions with my auntie. Auntie at the end of these sessions would try to defend my mother, or make me seem like I'm blowing things out of proportion. I tried to come up with my own reasons at the time on why she was not trying to understand things wholly, and I chalked it up to her being empathetic, maybe being able to explain why my mother was terrible was supposed to help me embrace it in some weird way. And then more things like that seemed to happen. I admit that when I was 16 years old, I was a terrible kid. I went to parties, drank whatever was served, and definitely did not tell anyone what I was doing. But then Auntie started to ask very specific questions, especially to the topics mentioned above. I was in shock. Again, I gave her the benefit of the doubt and thought that her sudden pinpointing of these things must be from the fact that at this point, she's known me for almost a decade. All the way into a year later, she started to bring up the parties I've gone to in these sessions without even bothering to hide behind questions. The relationship between me and my mother had almost been completely severed, and the worst part of all, something that still affects me till this day. At the end of each session, Auntie had started to invite me into the room and tell her every single thing I said. It was terrible hearing my own words against my mother, explaining the increasing abuse that she has begun to put me through, said straight to her face as she sat next to me. My grades in school began to drop, my mother forbade me from going out, and I was completely isolated. So I tried to kill myself on my 17th birthday. I ran into my mother's room looking for something that I could overdose with, or just something that could push me to the edge. I remember rummaging through everything until I went into her walk-in closet. I had barely gone into her room. In fact, I completely forgot about the fact that she even had one of these. In my crazed state, I just remember running into her closet and looking through every crevice. I stumbled upon a suitcase leaning against the wall under the hung-up clothes. If I close my eyes, I can still imagine it. It didn't look old, so that was probably what made me decide to open it up. When I did, all I saw was a shit ton of papers. The surprise of seeing so much snapped me out of the state I was in, and I recall sitting crossed-legged on the floor and wondering what the fuck these papers were. After a while of reading, I realized that these were transcripts of Auntie and I's sessions. Literally dating all the way back to some of the first sessions that I did. I remember feeling sick, feeling so sick. I at least had enough sense to steal a few of the earlier papers, to make it less noticeable. Reading through those transcripts just filled me up with more and more bitter questions, and I decided that night that I would kill myself after what I figured out what was going on. I was in a time crunch, feeling stressed because I really only had a year left to figure out what the hell was going on before I was faced with the looming threat of being kicked out as soon as I turned 18. I started to pay way more attention in our sessions, looking around her house whenever I got the chance to, looking for some indicators that could tell me who this psychologist really was. I started asking my mother more and more questions about Auntie, and she kept deflecting, repeating the same fact. She was a psychologist. That's until I did something that literally almost ruined the rest of my life. I decided to steal my mother's phone. It seems like a small thing now, but then it was really life or death. My mother was in the shower, and I had already packed all the stuff I needed to be out for a few hours, maybe even for a few nights somewhere. As soon as I heard the door lock, I swiped my mother's phone and bolted out the house. I didn't even look down at the damn thing until I was on the bus. I remember looking through my mother's messages first, and I knew I found Auntie when I stumbled across an unfamiliar name. Even better when the messages clearly showed when my mother booked appointments. I scrolled up for a while, enough for the bus to get me to a safe place, but even as I walked off the bus and years of texts were read, nothing incriminating had shown itself. I then looked through my mother's call logs, and I saw the fact that they call extremely often. I wasn't an idiot. Whatever was really going on was happening on calls instead of messages. Which was smart, I'll give credit where credit is due. But it still didn't get me anything. I found a place to sit on the side of the road, and I continued my search. I looked through my mother's social media, and when I tried searching up Auntie's name, nothing came up. I genuinely felt all hope leave my body then, and sometimes now I swear I can still feel the same sick feeling as I felt then. I almost gave up. Every day I thank myself for mindlessly swiping through my mother's followers, because I found her. Her account name didn't have her real name, some weird fake one. But when I clicked on her profile, it was most definitely her. She posted photos with some of my mother's friends, and I scrolled for a while down her page until I saw a photo that I posted of herself and my mother. Years ago. They have literally been friends even before I was born. I felt sick, betrayed, and a bit relieved that I now knew what the hell was going on. Why my mother had transcripts, why Auntie didn't think twice before telling my mother every single thing I said, why she defended her. I didn't even bother to find a place to stay that night, I just went back home. I got beat black and blue for doing something that didn't deserve any forgiveness. It didn't hurt at all compared to what I found out earlier that day. All I asked my mother that night was, "Who is Auntie really?" And she couldn't even answer that. A few years later, I was in my first year of university. I had the lucky chance to move out of my mother's house as soon as I got the chance to, with an old friend taking pity on me and allowing me to stay with him since we applied to the same university. He's one of my best friends now. What finally gave me closure in some bittersweet way, clearing out my Instagram. I deleted people that I didn't care about or didn't know. My heart dropped when I saw a familiar username in my followers. I didn't think about it at all when I searched up the username in the search bar, and when it came up with Auntie's Facebook account. This psycho had been following me for God knows how long on my Instagram, and suddenly everything that didn't click finally made sense. The sudden, precise questions, why my mother suddenly decided to isolate me from my friends. It didn't even say, psychologist, or anything of the sort in her fucking bio. Tell me why it said, chemistry teacher with over 20 years. Oh. I admit that I cried like a baby that night, because it had taken years for me to finally understand why two of my main female models seemed to despise me. Still to this day, I mourn the fact that most of my early adult years are being used to heal from everything in my childhood, instead of going out with newly made friends and giving my all to university. It sucks. Everyone who hears my life story agrees on the fact that there's something wrong with them. I just wished I knew that sooner. 2 days ago, I had my first session with a real psychologist. Trust me, I did my research. I felt almost ashamed when I blurted out the reason why I'm sitting in this guy's chair. But he just smiled and told me we had a lot of work to do. Yeah, we do. I decided to post about my experience just in the slight chance anyone had a similar experience with therapy becoming fucked up or they feel like they've been living in a hole their entire life. I promise you guys, it gets better with a little luck and surrounding yourself with the right people at least. Anyway, Auntie, let's not meet again. Story 14. Strange man in rural Ireland. Saw someone else post a story about Ireland, so it felt right to post about something that happened to my friend and I. For context, my best friend and I are both from London, but her family on her dad's side is from Ireland, so she goes there every summer for the entire summer. Last summer, I went to go and stay with her for 2 weeks at her grandpa's house. Her granddad lives in rural Ireland, like rural. The town is at least a 40-minute drive away and his house is the only building within the area. It backs onto a massive forest and faces onto a lake. It's really quite beautiful, but that's beyond the point. My best friend's granddad, brother, aunt and dad were going to the pub one evening. They invited us, which was of course a tempting offer, but we declined as we were excited at the prospect of having the house to ourselves, something that doesn't happen a lot given we are teenagers, so we decided to have a chill evening in and basically playhouse. Of course, if you've been to Ireland, you know that a quick pint is anything but quick, and her family had been gone for some time by this point, about a few hours, when it was approaching 10 p.m. We were watching a movie in her living room when we heard a knock on the door. We reckoned maybe it was her family who had forgotten their key, so we went to answer. Her granddad's front door led into the conservatory, which then led to the actual front door of the house. So we made it to the conservatory door expecting her family, but instead there was a man at the door. Slightly confused, we kinda just looked at him waiting for him to say something, during which I had time to take in his appearance. There was something off about him, to say the least. He looked insane, bizarrely alert, and yet slightly scary. I can't quite explain it, but if you know, you know. He said his car had broken down and he needed to use the phone to call someone to pick him up. I looked out but couldn't see a car at all, and said something to the effect of, "Where's your car?" He responded by explaining that he had broken down about 30 minutes down the road and had walked until he found a house. Given that, as I explained prior, my friend's granddad lived in a fairly remote area, this was plausible. With slight hesitation, my friend passed him her phone and said he could call who he needed to call and wait on the doorstep. He didn't accept the offer, however. Instead, he just kind of ignored it and started asking if there were any adults/parents in the house. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt and assume he was asking this as maybe he felt more comfortable sharing his predicament with adults rather than 2 teenage girls. We didn't know if we should tell him we were alone or not, cause we would usually know better than that, but given the situation we explained they were out but may be back soon. He started to look past us and into the house and then began insisting we let him in the house as he wanted to use the landline. At this point we were more than suspicious, because if he wanted to call someone, why not just use my friend's phone? He was erratic, continuously insisting we let him in. At that point, my friend said he'd either use her mobile or leave, but beyond that there was nothing more we could do for him. He again insisted he come into the house, so we just shut the door on him, locked it, and then locked the door to the actual house. Freaked out, we sat in her living room trying to peep out the window and see if he'd gone. He lingered for a bit looking into the windows, maybe looking for a way in, but then we saw him leave, though we couldn't make out what direction he went in. We were scared as fuck. To add fuel to the fire, my friend explained that the nearby town was pretty small and everyone in the area pretty much knew each other. She had never seen him in her life, which scared her as she was acquainted with most of the town by now. We contemplated calling her dad, but since it had been about 30 minutes with no disruption, we just left it and continued with our night. Later on, her dog was getting restless and her family was still out, so we let her into the back garden. After about 5 minutes we heard her barking, but it was too dark to see what she was barking at, so we put it down to it more than likely being a goat, because that was usually the case. We called her in and went about our night. We realized her family probably wouldn't be back until the early hours and, instead of waiting for them, we decided to head up to bed. I went into the kitchen, which is at the back of the house, to get us some water when I heard someone shaking the handle of the back door trying to get in. The thing is, it's a really old house, so I didn't exactly put all my faith in the door holding up against the weight of what I suspected to be a grown man. I screamed bloody murder and my friend ran down the stairs. At this point he was banging on the door like his life depended on it, and I swear to God I felt my heart fall out my arsehole. My friend shouted back that she was going to call the police, which was a lie as she had taken our phones upstairs, but she thought it may deter him. Luckily, this seemed to scare him off. He stopped banging. We heard his footsteps move further and further away until we couldn't hear them anymore. We were literally frozen in fear and couldn't even speak to each other. Then we heard the front door open and pretty much thought that was it for us. On instinct my friend grabbed a knife and we hid in the pantry. You can only imagine our relief when we heard her dad call out for us saying they were back. We were absolutely dazed and I'm sure they could tell, so we frantically asked them, "Did you see a car on your way here, a broken down car?" They responded they didn't, and I swear to God I could have shit myself then and there. So, to the strange man who tried to break into my best friend's granddad's house, let's never ever fucking meet. Story 15. I think someone was following me through the woods in Ireland. Back when I was 14 years old, my family had moved from our home in England to the Republic of Ireland, where we lived for a further 6 years. We had first moved to the northwest of the country, but after a year of living there, we then relocated to the Irish Midlands, as my dad had gotten a new job working in Dublin. My parents had bought a cottage on the outskirts of a very small village that was a stopping point from one of the larger towns to the next. This village was so small and remote, there was basically nothing to do. But not long after moving here and taking to exploring the surrounding area with my border collie, Maisie, I eventually found a large stretch of bogland containing a man-made forest. Every weekend or half-term away from school, I took to walking this area with my dog, in which I would follow along a railway line used for transporting peat. However, after months of trekking this very same bogland, I eventually stopped going there. I can't quite recall the reason why, but maybe it was because I always felt as though I was trespassing, which I wasn't, or because the bogland was so bumpy and uneven, I always came home with horrific blisters. Although I stopped going to this bogland to walk my dog, outside one of the nearby towns where I went to school, there was a public forest. Because this forest was a 20-minute drive away, my dad would take me and Maisie there, drop us off and then pick us up again 2 or 3 hours later. What I loved about these woods was that it was always quiet, only with the occasional family, dog walker or jogger passing us by. On one particular evening, I had gone back to these woods with Maisie, where my dad would later pick us up after running some errands. Making our way along the trail, the evening had already started to dimmer. Wanting to make my way back to the car park before it got too dark, I decided to take a shortcut through the forest via one of the many narrow side trails. Following down one of these side trails, me and Maisie stumbled upon a small teepee-shaped hut made from logs. Loving a good game of hide and seek, I would sometimes hide inside this teepee when Maisie wasn't looking, where she would spend the next couple of minutes circling round the hut trying to find me, not realizing she could just go inside. Whether I played this game with Maisie that day, I'm not sure, but following down this exact same side trail, I turned to look behind me. Staring down the entryway, I then see a man walking 20 meters behind, having just taken this side trail. For some unknown reason, I had a strange instant feeling about this man, even though I had only just noticed him. I can't remember or even describe the way this man was walking, but the way he did so felt suspicious to me. Listening to my instincts, or perhaps just my paranoia, I quickly latch my lead back onto Maisie and hurriedly make my way down the trail. A few minutes later, although I had reached back onto the main trail, the evening had already turned much darker. Again turning to see if the man was behind me, I could still see him around the curve, only 10 meters away from me now. I did try to tell myself I was just being paranoid, and this man was most likely not following me, but my gut instinct still told me something was off. Thinking ahead, I pulled out my phone to call my dad, to make sure he was already in the car park waiting for me, but there was no answer. Because there was no answer, I just assumed he was probably still driving, and because he was still driving, I just hoped my dad was nearly on his way. By the time I made it back to the car park, it was basically pitch black by now, and there was just one single car in the parking area, but it wasn't my dad's. Sitting down by a picnic bench to wait for him to come and get us, all I could do was hope he would be coming soon and that this strange man from the woods was not following me after all. Only a minute or two later, I could hear the footsteps of this very same man approaching through the darkness. Anxiously anticipating him passing by, I tried to distract myself on my phone, or at least make myself seem less approachable. Thankfully enough, the man just walks completely by me. Entering the car park, the man then gets in his vehicle, the only car in the car park, but he doesn't drive away. He just stayed there, sat inside his car with both the engine and headlights turned on. 20 minutes must have gone by, but my dad still wasn't here, and yet this very same stranger was. Trying to call and text my dad to say I was waiting for him, I was met with no answer. While I continued waiting, I tried to rationalize why this man hadn't decided to drive off. Whatever reasons I came up with, they were not very convincing for me, and for those whole 20, or however many more minutes, I sat outside those woods in complete darkness, hearing nothing but the hum of this stranger's engine among the silent night air. What made this situation even more anxiety-inducing was that my dog Maisie had been endlessly whining by my feet, scraping dirt away beneath the bench to make a surprisingly deep hole. Maisie was in general a very nervous dog and basically whined at everything, but perhaps she too felt as though something about this situation wasn't right. Thankfully, after what felt far longer than 20 minutes, the strange man, already with his engine and headlights on, reverses from his parking spot, exits out of the car park and onto the main road, leaving me and Maisie in peace. Although we were now alone, basically stranded outside of a dark forest, I couldn't help but feel a huge sigh of relief come over me. My dad did eventually come and get us, 10 minutes after the man had finally decided to drive off. Do you want to know what my dad's excuse was as to why he was so late? He forgot he had to pick us up. I don't know if that man really was following me through the forest, and I definitely don't know why he just sat in his car for 20 minutes. But if I had to learn anything from that experience, it would be the following. 1. My dad can sometimes be a careless douche, and 2. Never hike through the forest alone, late in the evening.